Billionaire suffers a cyber attack and loses $9 billion, bankrupting his company, until the 7-year-old janitor's daughter reveals something that breaks his heart and changes him forever. Whether it's morning coffee or bedtime, you're exactly where you need to be. If this resonates, like and subscribe for more. Richard Coleman slammed his fist against the mahogany desk, causing his collection of awards to tremble. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he stared at the screen, numbers plummeting in real time. $2.9 billion, evaporating before his eyes. "Sir," his security chief Marcus said, voice tight with panic, "they've breached every firewall. Our entire system is compromised." Richard's empire, Titan Technologies, built over 30 years of relentless work, was collapsing in minutes. The cyber attack had bypassed security protocols that were supposedly impenetrable. His phone buzzed incessantly, board members, investors, the press. "Shut it down," Richard ordered, his voice hollow. "Shut everything down. If we do that, we might lose." "We've already lost everything," Richard roared, veins bulging in his neck. At 62, Richard Coleman had believed himself untouchable. Forbes had listed him among America's 50 wealthiest individuals. His downtown Chicago office occupied the top 3 floors of a building bearing his name. Now, as screens throughout the office flashed warning messages, that empire teetered on the edge of oblivion. In the hallway outside, Margaret Mitchell pushed her cleaning cart quietly, trying to remain invisible as executives rushed past in panic. At 42, Margaret had worked as Titan's night janitor for 3 years. Tonight, her 7-year-old daughter Emma sat quietly on the cart, small legs dangling, watching the chaos with solemn brown eyes. "Mommy, why is everyone scared?" Emma whispered. "Shh, honey," Margaret murmured, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "Remember, you need to be quiet when you come to work with me." Margaret hadn't wanted to bring Emma, but her sister, who usually watched her, had an emergency. With her meager salary and mounting medical bills, childcare wasn't an option. The cancer treatments had drained what little savings she had, and the expensive medication her doctor recommended remained far beyond her reach. Inside his office, Richard stared at the falling numbers, decades of work unraveling. He thought of his late wife, Catherine, who'd always warned him about prioritizing business over humanity. "One day, Rick," she'd said before cancer took her 5 years ago, "you'll realize what truly matters." As alarms blared and the future of Titan Technologies hung in the balance, no one noticed little Emma watching the screens through the glass walls, her extraordinary mind processing information at a level no one could have imagined. And in that moment, as 2 very different worlds collided, the countdown to an unlikely salvation began. Dawn broke over Chicago, painting the Coleman Tower in hues of orange and gold. Richard hadn't left his office, his haggard reflection staring back from the windows. Titan stock had plummeted 78% overnight. Emergency board meetings had devolved into shouting matches. His phone contained 142 unanswered messages. The latest estimate is $9 billion, said Diane Foster, his CFO of 15 years. Her voice trembled slightly as she placed the report on his desk. "The malware encrypted everything. Customer data, proprietary technology, financial records. They're demanding a ransom, but even if we pay..." "We're finished," Richard completed, his voice distant. Outside, in the employee break room, Margaret Mitchell swallowed another pain pill dry. The medication barely touched the constant ache in her breast, where the cancer had spread aggressively. She'd hidden the diagnosis from everyone at work, fearing she'd lose the job she desperately needed for the health insurance, inadequate as it was. "Mommy, you forgot your breakfast," Emma said, offering a slightly squashed banana from her backpack. Margaret smiled weakly. "You eat it, sweetheart. I'm not hungry." Emma's eyes, wise beyond their 7 years, saw through the lie. You need to eat to take your medicine. The doctor said so. The doctor had said many things about experimental treatments, survival rates, and options Margaret couldn't afford. What he hadn't said was how she would explain to her brilliant daughter that Mommy might not see her 8th birthday. Ms. Mitchell, a stern voice interrupted. Stanley Weaver, head of building services, stood in the doorway. You know company policy about bringing children to work. I'm sorry, Mr. Weaver. My sister had an emergency and one more incident and I'll have to let you go, he said, though his expression softened when Emma looked up at him. The executives are in crisis mode. Keep her quiet and out of sight today. And back in his office, Richard stared at the family photo on his desk, Catherine, smiling from their yacht in happier times. What would you do, Kathy? He whispered. Titan's security team had worked through the night, bringing in external experts at exorbitant rates. The verdict remained unchanged. The attack was unlike anything they'd seen, with encryption protocols that would take years to break. Sir, his assistant Jennifer interrupted, the FBI Cyber Division is here. As federal agents filled his office, Richard felt the control slipping further away. Reporters had gathered outside the building, and rumors of Titan's impending bankruptcy spread across financial networks. In a quiet corner of the building, Emma sat cross-legged beside her mother's cleaning cart, a borrowed tablet in her lap. While Margaret disinfected executive bathrooms, Emma's fingers moved across the screen with purpose, her eyes narrowing as patterns emerged in the chaotic streams of code she'd glimpsed on the company screens. That's not right, she whispered to herself, recognizing something in the digital chaos that the adults had missed. A signature, a pattern, a possibility. As night fell again, two worlds continued on separate trajectories, the millionaire drowning in the wreckage of his ambitions, and the little girl whose extraordinary mind had already begun to map a path through the darkness. Neither realized how soon those trajectories would collide. 3 days after the attack, Titan Technologies resembled a sinking ship. Employees huddled in groups, whispering about job prospects. The board had given Richard 48 hours to present a recovery plan before forcing a liquidation vote. The government investigators say it's the most sophisticated attack they've ever seen, Diane reported, sliding a document across Richard's desk. They've traced it to a group operating out of Eastern Europe, but recovery. She hesitated. Recovery isn't looking promising. Richard had aged years in days. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated. Silver hair disheveled, expensive suit wrinkled from sleeping on his office couch. The same determination that had built his empire now kept him from accepting defeat, though options dwindled by the hour. What about our backup systems? He demanded. Compromised. They were thorough, Richard. This wasn't random. Someone wanted to destroy us specifically. The thought had haunted him. Who hated him enough to orchestrate such complete destruction? Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the building, Margaret Mitchell leaned against her cleaning cart, overcome by a wave of dizziness. The cancer was progressing faster than her doctors had predicted. The experimental treatment that offered her best hope cost $475,000, money she'd never see in her lifetime. "Mommy?" Emma's voice seemed distant through the fog of pain. "Mommy, sit down." Margaret allowed herself to be guided to a chair, alarmed by her daughter's worried expression. "I'm okay, baby. Just tired." "You're not okay," Emma insisted, her small hand surprisingly cool against Margaret's feverish forehead. "You need the special medicine." Margaret pulled her daughter close, inhaling the scent of her shampoo. "Let's not worry about that now." Emma pulled away, her expression suddenly serious. "I know how to fix the company's computers." Margaret blinked, momentarily forgetting her pain. "What, honey?" "The numbers that disappeared. I know how to bring them back." Margaret smiled sadly, attributing the comment to childish imagination. "That's nice, sweetie." "I'm serious, Mommy," Emma insisted. "It's like a puzzle, and I can see how the pieces fit." Before Margaret could respond, Stanley Weaver appeared. "Mitchell, we need you on the executive floor. Someone got sick in the conference room." As Margaret gathered her cleaning supplies, Emma tugged at her sleeve. "I need to tell Mr. Coleman about the computers." "Emma, please," Margaret whispered. "Mr. Coleman is a very important, very busy man. He doesn't have time for—" "But I can help him." Emma's voice rose, drawing Stanley's attention. "Everything okay, Mitchell?" Margaret nodded quickly. "Fine, sir. My daughter just has an active imagination." In his office, Richard reviewed liquidation scenarios with his legal team. 30 years of building gone in an instant. He'd have to sell the house in Aspen, the apartment in Manhattan, the collection of classic cars. The thought didn't bother him as much as expected. Since Catherine's death, those possessions had provided little comfort. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Coleman," Jennifer said, "there's a situation in the hallway. A child is insisting on speaking with you. Security is handling it, but I thought you should know." Richard sighed. "A child?" "The janitor's daughter, sir. She's quite persistent." Richard was about to dismiss the interruption when something stopped him. Catherine had always believed in signs and moments of fate. "Send them in," he said suddenly. His legal team exchanged glances as the door opened, revealing a small girl with determined eyes, her embarrassed mother hovering behind her. "Mr. Coleman," Emma said without preamble, "I know how to fix your computers. I'm so sorry, Mr. Coleman," Margaret said, mortified as she tried to pull Emma back. "She doesn't understand." Richard raised a hand, silencing her. Something in the child's confident gaze made him pause. "It's all right. Everyone give us the room." His team filed out, exchanging concerned glances. Richard's mental state had become a whispered concern throughout the company. Was this a sign he'd finally cracked under pressure? "What's your name?" Richard asked once they were alone. "Emma Mitchell. I'm 7.5. My mom cleans your building." Richard nodded to Margaret, who stood nervously by the door. "And you think you can fix our computer problem?" Emma nodded solemnly. "It's not random. The attack has a pattern, like a signature. I saw it on the screens." Richard leaned forward. "And how would you know about such things?" "I just see how things connect," Emma replied simply. "Numbers and codes make pictures in my head." Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman, Emma has always been different. Her teachers wanted to skip her ahead several grades, but we couldn't afford the special programs they recommended." Richard studied the child thoughtfully. Throughout his career, he'd developed an instinct for exceptional talent. Something about Emma's unwavering confidence reminded him of himself at a young age, before money and power had complicated everything. "Show me," he said finally, turning his laptop toward her. Emma's small fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising dexterity. Margaret watched in astonishment as her daughter navigated complex systems with the ease of a seasoned professional. "See this?" Emma pointed to a section of code. "It's hiding something. The bad code has a back door." Richard squinted at the screen, understanding enough to know he was witnessing something extraordinary. "How did you learn this?" Emma shrugged. "I just see it, like how some kids can play piano without lessons." For the first time in days, a flicker of hope stirred in Richard's chest. He'd built his fortune by recognizing opportunities others missed. Was it possible his salvation would come from this unlikely source? "If what you're saying is true," Richard said carefully, "it would be worth a great deal to the company." Emma's expression remained serious. "I want one thing in exchange." "Emma," Margaret interjected, horrified at her daughter's boldness. "What's that?" Richard asked, curious despite himself. "My mum needs special medicine for her cancer." "The doctors say it costs too much for regular people, but you're rich. Even if your company is broken, you can help her." The room fell silent. Margaret closed her eyes, humiliation washing over her. She'd kept her condition private, maintaining her dignity through grueling treatments and financial hardship. Richard looked at Margaret with new awareness, noticing the pallor beneath her complexion, the careful way she held herself against pain. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. Margaret nodded reluctantly. "Stage 3 breast cancer. The standard treatments haven't been effective, and the experimental options," she trailed off, "aren't covered by our company insurance," Richard finished, a strange hollowness opening inside him. Catherine had died of the same disease, despite access to the world's best treatments. "I don't want charity," Margaret said firmly, "and I certainly didn't put Emma up to this." Richard turned back to the child, whose determined expression hadn't wavered. "You understand what's happened to my company?" Emma nodded. "Someone locked all your important information and threw away the key, but they left fingerprints. I can follow them back." Richard made a decision. "Jennifer," he called, pressing the intercom. "Get Dr. Harrison from Cybersecurity up here immediately, and call my private physician. I want him to meet with Ms. Mitchell today." As his assistant acknowledged the instructions, Richard looked between mother and daughter, one facing death with quiet dignity, the other facing the world with extraordinary gifts and fierce love. "Let's make a deal, Emma Mitchell," he said. By midnight, Titan's Crisis Command Center had been transformed. Whiteboards covered with Emma's surprisingly articulate diagrams lined the walls. Senior engineers watched in disbelief as the 7-year-old directed their efforts with unmistakable authority. "It's like watching Mozart conduct an orchestra," whispered Dr. Harrison, Titan's head of cybersecurity. "I've been in this field for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like her." Richard observed from the corner, equal parts hopeful and skeptical. He'd arranged for Margaret to see the top oncologist in Chicago that afternoon, secretly paying for comprehensive testing. The doctor's preliminary report confirmed what Margaret had told him. Without the experimental immunotherapy treatment, her prognosis was grim. "Mr. Coleman," Emma called, interrupting his thoughts. "I need to show you something." She led him to a monitor displaying what appeared to be encrypted data. "I found this hidden in the attack code. It's a message." Richard squinted at the screen. "What does it say?" "It says, 'Payback from an old friend.'" Emma looked up at him. "Do you have enemies, Mr. Coleman?" The question, coming from a child, struck Richard with unexpected force. Of course he had enemies. No one accumulated his level of wealth without making them. His mind raced through possibilities, competitors he'd crushed, partners he'd outmaneuvered, employees he'd dismissed. "It's someone who knows your systems," Emma continued, unaware of his internal turmoil. "Someone who's been inside before." Across town, in a modest hotel room, Margaret Mitchell stared at the ceiling, processing the oncologist's words. The experimental treatment offered a 68% chance of remission, miraculous odds, compared to her current path. And somehow, her brilliant, impossible daughter had secured her this chance. "Ms. Mitchell?" A nurse entered, carrying medication. "Dr. Whitman ordered these to help with the pain until we begin the treatment protocol." Margaret accepted the pills, still stunned by the rapid transformation of her circumstances. "As Mr. Coleman, is he really covering everything?" The nurse nodded. "The financial authorization is complete. Dr. Whitman has already ordered the custom medications from Switzerland." Back at Titan headquarters, Richard received a call that pulled him from the crisis room. It was Adrian Wells, his former chief technology officer, whom he'd fired 18 months earlier after catching him stealing proprietary algorithms. "Enjoying my handiwork, Richard?" Adrian's voice was smooth with satisfaction. "You," Richard breathed, pieces falling into place. "You did this." "Consider it my severance package," Adrian replied. "You took everything from me, my reputation, my career, my future. Now I've returned the favor." "You won't get away with this," Richard said, struggling to control his rage. Adrian laughed. "I already have. Even if you somehow recover the data, which is impossible, Titan's reputation is destroyed. Your stock is worthless. You're finished, Richard, just like you finished me." The call ended. Richard stood motionless, Adrian's words echoing in his mind. He'd considered himself justified in destroying Adrian's career. The man had stolen from him. That Adrian would retaliate with such devastating precision had never occurred to him. He returned to the crisis room, watching Emma work with the team of experts 3 and 4 times her age. Her small face was set in concentration, innocent, yet somehow ancient in its understanding. "We found something," called one of the engineers. "Emma's approach is working. We've decrypted a small portion of the financial database." For the first time in days, excitement rippled through the room. Richard felt something shift inside him. Not just hope for his company, but something more profound. This child, whose mother cleaned his building for minimum wage while battling cancer, had shown more loyalty to Titan than people he'd rewarded with millions. As dawn approached, Emma finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling up on a couch in the corner. Richard draped his suit jacket over her small form, a gesture that surprised even himself. "We'll continue after she rests," he told the team. "In the meantime, I want everything we can find on Adrian Wells." As the engineers dispersed, Richard sat beside the sleeping child, watching her peaceful expression. For the first time since Catherine's death, he felt the stirrings of something he'd thought permanently lost. His humanity. The next morning, Margaret arrived at Coleman Tower to find the lobby transformed. Security guards, who had previously ignored her, now escorted her directly to Richard's private elevator. "Mr. Coleman has requested you join the recovery team," explained Jennifer, who waited on the executive floor. "Emma is already working with the engineers." Margaret followed in bewilderment. Just days ago, she'd been invisible, cleaning bathrooms after hours. Now she walked through Titan's most restricted areas, watched with new respect by the same executives who'd previously looked through her. In the command center, she found Emma sitting beside Richard, explaining something about encryption patterns. The billionaire was listening with the focused attention he typically reserved for world leaders and major investors. "Mom!" Emma ran to embrace her. "We're winning! The bad code is breaking!" Richard approached, looking more human than Margaret had ever seen him. The imperious titan of industry had been replaced by a tired, humbled man. "Your daughter is extraordinary," he said quietly. "We've recovered approximately 20% of our encrypted data. The FBI is calling it unprecedented." Margaret felt pride mingled with uncertainty. "And her request about my treatment." "Already in progress," Richard assured her. "Dr. Whitman called this morning. They're synthesizing the medication now." Across the room, screens displayed progress bars as recovery programs ran. Engineers who had initially humored Emma now deferred to her insights with genuine respect. The atmosphere had shifted from desperation to cautious optimism. "There's something else you should know," Richard said, guiding Margaret to a private corner. "We've identified the person behind the attack. Adrian Wells, my former CTO." "Is that significant?" Richard nodded grimly. "Adrian doesn't just want money. He wants revenge. He's already attempting to counter our recovery efforts." Margaret glanced at Emma, suddenly fearful. "Is this dangerous? Should I take her home?" "We've implemented every security measure available," Richard assured her, "but there's another concern." He hesitated. "The board is meeting today. Despite our progress, they're voting on whether to liquidate the company." Margaret absorbed this, understanding the implications. "So even if Emma helps you recover everything—" "It might be too late," Richard finished. "Unless we can show substantial recovery by 3 o'clock, Titan Technologies will cease to exist by sundown, Emma approached, seemingly oblivious to the weight of their conversation. "Mr. Coleman, I found something weird in the code. It looks like a countdown." Richard's expression tightened. "What kind of countdown?" "It's set to trigger something in." Emma checked her watch. A child's plastic timepiece with cartoon characters. 5 hours and 12 minutes. A dead man's switch, Richard realized aloud. If Adrian can't have Titan's data, he'll make sure no one can. The stakes had suddenly escalated beyond financial ruin. If they couldn't stop the countdown, even their current recovery progress would be erased, permanently. As the team mobilized with renewed urgency, Richard found himself facing a truth he'd long avoided. Throughout his career, he'd valued things, money, power, assets, above people. He'd discarded employees like Adrian without considering the human cost, creating enemies through his indifference. Now his salvation rested in the hands of a child whose mother he'd never noticed, despite her years of service. The irony wasn't lost on him. "We need to accelerate our efforts," he announced to the team. "Whatever resources you need, they're yours. Nothing is off limits." As engineers dispersed with new determination, Richard turned to find Emma watching him with those unsettlingly perceptive eyes. "You're scared," she said simply. Richard considered denying it, then nodded. "Yes." "That's okay," Emma replied, slipping her small hand into his. "Mum says being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared." Richard looked down at their joined hands, his weathered by time and privilege, hers small, yet somehow stronger. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in Richard Coleman's understanding of wealth. True fortunes, he was beginning to realize, couldn't be measured in billions. The command center transformed into a battlefield of algorithms and code. Engineers worked frantically as 3 countdown clocks dominated the main screen. Adrian's dead man's switch, 4 hours, 47 minutes. The board meeting, 2 hours, 12 minutes. And a third showing recovered data, currently 27%. Richard paced behind Emma, who directed the recovery effort with uncanny precision. Her small fingers flew across the keyboard, while specialists twice her height and 4 times her age implemented her instructions. "It's like she's speaking their native language, but with an accent they've never heard," Dr. Harrison whispered to Richard. "She approaches problems from angles that never occur to trained professionals." Richard nodded, watching the percentage of recovered data tick upward, 28%. 29%. The progress was remarkable but still too slow. At this rate, they wouldn't reach 50% by the board meeting, the minimum threshold he believed might sway the vote. "Mr. Coleman," Jennifer interrupted, "Adrian Wells is calling again." Richard stepped away, accepting the call on speaker so the FBI agents present could record it. "Your little recovery effort is cute," Adrian said without preamble. "Especially using a child. That's low, even for you, Richard." "How did you—" Richard began, then realized the implication. "You're still in our systems." Adrian's laugh echoed through the room. "Did you think I wouldn't build in contingencies? I see everything, including your pathetic attempt to counter my dead man's switch." Across the room, Emma looked up sharply, her expression focused as she listened to Adrian's voice. "What do you want, Adrian?" Richard demanded. "Name your price." "I had a price 18 months ago," Adrian replied coldly. "Before you destroyed my reputation, blacklisted me from the industry, and made sure no venture capital firm would touch my startups. Now, I just want to watch you fall." The call ended abruptly. Richard turned to find Emma standing beside him, her expression thoughtful. "His voice has a pattern too," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "He's not at home. There's an echo and background noise. He's somewhere big with lots of computers." One of the FBI agents approached. "Can you elaborate, Emma?" Emma closed her eyes, recalling the audio. Typing sounds from multiple keyboards. A hum, like the server rooms downstairs, and she concentrated harder. A voice on an intercom saying something about Sector 7 needing access. The agent's eyebrows shot up. That's impressive observation. Sector 7, Richard repeated, a suspicion forming. That's what we call our R&D department at our secondary data center in Evanston. He's inside your other facility, the agent asked, already alerting his team. It would explain how he's monitoring our recovery efforts, Richard confirmed. We've been focusing our security on external threats, not considering he might physically infiltrate our backup site. As the FBI mobilized to raid the Evanston facility, Emma returned to her workstation. Margaret had arrived with food, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked, noticing Margaret's pallor despite the medication. "Better, thank you," she replied, though the effort of standing seemed taxing. "The new treatment begins tomorrow." Richard nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. For 30 years, people like Margaret had cleaned his offices, maintained his buildings, served his meals, invisible cogs in his empire. How many had suffered while he remained oblivious in his penthouse office? "Emma says you lost your wife to cancer," Margaret said softly. Richard stiffened. "5 years ago, the same type you're fighting." "I'm sorry," Margaret said simply. "Emma told me you tried everything to save her." "Money couldn't save Catherine," Richard admitted, the truth he rarely voiced. "The best doctors, experimental treatments flown in from around the world. None of it mattered in the end." A commotion interrupted them as Jennifer rushed into the room. "Richard, the board members are arriving early. Howard Phillips is leading them up now." Richard checked the countdown. Still 90 minutes before the scheduled vote. "They're trying to catch us unprepared." "The recovery is at 34%, Dr. Harrison reported, nowhere near enough to sway them." Richard straightened his tie, preparing for battle. "Keep working. I'll stall them as long as possible." As he strode toward the conference room, Emma's voice stopped him. "Mr. Coleman, wait. I have an idea." She whispered something that made Richard's eyes widen. For the first time in days, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his haggard face. "That," he said, "is exactly what Catherine would have suggested." As board members filed into the executive conference room, Richard Coleman prepared to fight for his company with an unexpected strategy from the most unlikely strategist. Howard Phillips, Titan's board chairman for 15 years, surveyed the crisis room with thinly veiled disdain. At 71, with investments diversified across multiple industries, he viewed Titan's collapse as an unfortunate but manageable loss. "Richard," he said, nodding curtly, "we've moved the meeting forward. Market volatility waits for no one." Behind him stood 11 other board members, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to predatory. Richard had always maintained controlling interest in Titan, but the corporate bylaws granted the board authority in cases of catastrophic financial failure, a provision he'd never imagined would be invoked. "Before we begin," Richard said smoothly, "I'd like to introduce someone instrumental to our recovery efforts." He gestured to Emma, who stepped forward in her simple jeans and t-shirt, a stark contrast to the bespoke suits surrounding her. "A child?" Phillips scoffed. "Is this a joke, Richard?" "This is Emma Mitchell," Richard continued, unfazed. "Thanks to her unique abilities, we've already recovered 34% of our encrypted data, with more being restored every minute." The board members exchanged skeptical glances. Diane Foster, ever loyal as CFO, displayed the recovery statistics on the conference room screen. "Impressive," acknowledged Victoria Reeves, one of the younger board members. "But even at 100% recovery, the damage to investor confidence is severe. Our stock has fallen 82% in 3 days. Moreover," Phillips added, "the fact that a child penetrated the attack while our multi-million-dollar security team failed raises serious questions about management." Emma stepped forward. "May I say something?" Phillips blinked, caught off guard. This is highly irregular. So is losing $3 billion to a cyber attack, Emma countered, drawing surprised chuckles from several board members. I understand you're afraid. The room fell silent. Afraid? Phillips repeated, indignant. Yes, Emma continued calmly. You're afraid that if you support Mr. Coleman and the recovery fails, you'll lose money and look foolish. It's safer to give up now. Richard watched in astonishment as his board, titans of industry who controlled billions, were rendered speechless by a 7-year-old's simple truth. But giving up is never the answer, Emma continued. When my mom got sick, the doctors wanted her to try easy treatments that wouldn't help much. The hard treatment, the one that might actually save her, was too expensive and difficult. But that's the one worth fighting for. Margaret watched from the doorway, tears streaming silently down her face. Young lady, Phillips began, his tone softening despite himself, business decisions can't be based on emotional appeals. Why not? Emma challenged. Isn't business about people? If you close this company, what happens to the 5,327 people who work here? The precise number, which Richard himself hadn't known, hung in the air. How did you? Phillips began. I looked at the employee database while fixing the payroll system, Emma explained. That's 5,327 families who need their jobs. Before Phillips could respond, alarms blared throughout the building. Dr. Harrison burst into the conference room. The dead man's switch has accelerated, he reported urgently. We have less than 40 minutes before all data is permanently erased. Richard turned to the board. Vote if you must, but give us these 40 minutes to fight. Phillips hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Proceed with your recovery efforts. We'll reconvene after the deadline. As the team rushed back to work, Richard received a call from the FBI team at the Evanston facility. We've secured the building, Mr. Coleman, but Wells isn't here. However, we found evidence he was accessing your systems through a backdoor connection. Can you trace it? Working on it. He's bouncing his signal through multiple servers. Richard relayed this information to the team. Emma, already back at her workstation, looked up thoughtfully. If he's watching us, she reasoned, maybe we can trick him. What do you mean? We create a fake recovery screen showing we're failing while actually working on a different system he can't see. Dr. Harrison snapped his fingers. Network segmentation. We could isolate a subnet and make it invisible to his monitoring tools. Within minutes, they had implemented Emma's strategy. The main screens showed decreasing recovery percentages, a deliberate deception, while the actual work continued on quarantined systems. Recovery at 42% and climbing, reported an engineer from the secure terminal. Richard watched the countdown clock with growing tension. 28 minutes remaining. Even with their accelerated progress, complete recovery seemed impossible. Mr. Coleman, Emma called, I need to try something different. She explained her idea, a radical approach that even Dr. Harrison admitted he wouldn't have considered. It's risky, the security chief warned. If it fails, we could lose everything we've recovered so far. And if we do nothing, Adrian's switch will erase it anyway, Richard countered. Do it, Emma. As Emma implemented her solution, Margaret approached Richard. Whatever happens, she said quietly, thank you for believing in her. No one ever has before. Richard nodded, watching the little girl who had shown more courage and innovation than executives paid millions. I believe in her, he said simply, and I believe we've both been given a second chance. 20 minutes to complete data loss, announced the automated system as tension in the command center reached fever pitch. Emma's strategy, using fragments of Adrian's own code against him, had accelerated their recovery efforts dramatically. The percentage counter now showed 57%, but the approaching deadline loomed like a guillotine blade. We've found something, called one of the FBI technicians. Wells is operating from a mobile command center, a modified RV parked near Navy Pier. How close are you to apprehending him? Richard demanded. Teams are converging, but traffic is heavy. ETA 12 minutes. Too late, Richard realized. The dead man's switch would trigger before they reached Adrian. On the main screen, recovery progress continued. 58%, 59%. Their deception appeared to be working. Adrian hadn't countered their new approach, suggesting he remained unaware of their true strategy. Suddenly, Emma gasped. He knows. He's changing something in the code. The screens flickered as Adrian's countermeasures engaged. The countdown accelerated dramatically. 19 minutes instantly became 8 minutes. He's triggered the switch early, Dr. Harrison reported, fingers flying across his keyboard. We're losing ground. Recovery percentage began to drop. 59%, 58%, 57%. Adrian had discovered their deception and was retaliating with devastating efficiency. Mom, Emma called urgently, I need your help. Margaret hurried to her daughter's side, confused. Honey, I don't know anything about computers. It's not about computers, Emma explained, pulling her mother closer to whisper something. Margaret's eyes widened, then she nodded and hurried from the room. What are you planning? Richard asked, as alarms blared around them. A distraction, Emma replied, her small face set with determination. And I need to talk to Adrian. Richard hesitated, then nodded to Jennifer. Set up a direct connection. As engineers fought desperately against the accelerating data loss, Jennifer established communication with Adrian's location. His face appeared on screen, triumphant despite the FBI closing in on his position. Calling to beg, Richard, he sneered, then faltered at the sight of Emma. What is this? Hello, Mr. Wells, Emma said calmly. I'm the one who's been undoing your attack. Adrian's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. That's impossible. You're what? 8? 7.5, Emma corrected. And it's not impossible. Your code is really good, but it has patterns, like fingerprints. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Adrian's face. You expect me to believe a child broke encryption that would challenge government agencies. Why did you attack Mr. Coleman's company? Emma asked, ignoring his skepticism. Adrian's jaw tightened. He destroyed everything I built. 18 months ago, I developed an algorithm that would have revolutionized predictive analytics. Richard claimed I stole it from Titan, but the truth is, he stole it from me. Richard stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. That's a lie! The evidence was conclusive. The evidence was fabricated, Adrian cut in. By the time I realized what had happened, you'd already turned the industry against me. My reputation was ruined. Emma looked between them thoughtfully. So both of you think the other one stole something? It's not what I think, Adrian insisted. It's what happened. Then why erase the evidence? Emma challenged. If Mr. Coleman really stole your work, wouldn't the proof be in Titan's systems? The same systems you're trying to destroy? Adrian hesitated, visibly processing her logic. 7 minutes to complete data loss, announced the automated system. What if you're both telling the truth? Emma continued. What if neither of you stole anything? That's impossible, both men said simultaneously. Unless someone else wanted you to fight, Emma suggested. Someone who benefits if you destroy each other. On a secondary screen, Margaret reappeared in the command center, nodding to Emma. Their mysterious plan was in motion. Recovery holding at 54%, reported Dr. Harrison. But we're running out of time. Emma turned back to Adrian. Stop the attack, Mr. Wells. If you're right about Mr. Coleman stealing your work, let's find the proof together instead of destroying it. Adrian's expression hardened. Why should I trust either of you? Because I'm 7.5, Emma replied simply, and grown-ups are supposed to listen when kids make sense. A surprised laugh escaped Adrian despite himself. For a moment, the bitterness in his expression softened. The command center door burst open as Margaret returned with Stanley Weaver, the building services manager. "Tell them," Margaret urged. Stanley stepped forward nervously. 18 months ago, I was approached by someone claiming to be from corporate security. They paid me to install monitoring software on both Mr. Coleman's and Mr. Wells' computers. Richard and Adrian stared in shock. "Who?" Richard demanded. "Who paid you?" "Victor Zhang," Stanley replied. "From Quantum Dynamics." Richard's face drained of color. "Our chief competitor. 5 minutes to complete data loss," announced the system. On screen, Adrian's expression transformed as the pieces fell into place. "Son of a bitch, we've been played against each other." "Stop the attack," Emma pleaded. "Then we can prove what really happened." Adrian hesitated, conflicted after 18 months of focused vengeance. 4 minutes, 30 seconds to complete data loss. "I can't stop it," Adrian admitted, his voice tight with frustration. "The dead man's switch is autonomous now. It's designed to complete its sequence even if I try to abort." Richard turned to Emma. "Any ideas?" Emma was already moving, fingers flying across the keyboard. "If we can't stop it, maybe we can redirect it." "What does that mean?" Richard asked. "Like a river," Emma explained, not looking up. "If you can't stop the water, you change where it flows." Dr. Harrison leaned over her shoulder, eyes widening as he understood her strategy. "She's creating a virtual environment, a sandbox. If it works, the switch will trigger inside the containment area instead of across our actual systems." 3 minutes to complete data loss, the automated voice announced. On screen, Adrian watched Emma's work with visible amazement. "That approach shouldn't. How did you even think of that?" Emma didn't answer, her focus absolute as she constructed the digital equivalent of a bomb containment vessel. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her small shoulders rigid with concentration. "FBI teams have reached the RV," Jennifer reported. "They're moving in to apprehend Wells." Adrian glanced off camera, then back at the screen. "I'm not resisting, but you need my access credentials to help contain this." He began typing rapidly, sending authorization codes to Emma's terminal. "Recovery stable at 54%, reported an engineer. "If the containment works, we might save what we've already restored. 2 minutes to complete data loss." Richard paced behind Emma, helpless as the fate of his company rested on the small shoulders of a child he'd met just days ago. Around them, engineers worked feverishly, following Emma's lead in constructing the virtual environment. "It's too complex," Dr. Harrison warned. "We need more time to build proper containment." We don't have more time," Richard reminded him. "I have an idea," Adrian interjected from the screen, FBI agents now visible behind him. "Emma, if you modify the parameter sequence on line 427, you can exploit a recursion loop in my original code." Emma nodded, implementing his suggestion without hesitation. Richard watched in astonishment as victim and attacker collaborated, united against the autonomous destruction neither could control alone. 1 minute to complete data loss. "It's not going to hold," Dr. Harrison warned, analyzing the containment structure. "The encryption cascade is too powerful. We need to divide it," Emma said suddenly. "Like when Mom separates laundry into different machines." Understanding dawned on Adrian's face. Distributed containment across multiple virtual environments. Brilliant. With seconds ticking away, they split the containment strategy across separate systems. Emma coordinated the effort with preternatural calm, directing engineers with the authority of someone 4 times her age. 30 seconds to complete data loss. The board members had returned, watching in stunned silence from the doorway. Howard Phillips stood at the front, his earlier skepticism replaced by unconcealed amazement. 15 seconds to complete data loss. "Almost there," Emma murmured, making final adjustments. "Everyone, step back from your terminals. 10 seconds. 9, 8. The room fell silent, dozens of people holding their breath collectively. 3, 2, 1. A cascade of error messages flooded every screen simultaneously. Warnings flashed and systems rebooted automatically. For several agonizing seconds, chaos reigned in the digital infrastructure. Then, gradually, systems stabilized. Status indicators returned one by one. Containment holding at 87% efficiency, reported an engineer, voice thick with disbelief. Data integrity, maintaining. Recovery status? Richard demanded. Dr. Harrison checked the primary terminal. Recovery intact at 54%, and it's climbing again. 55%, 56%. A cheer erupted throughout the command center. Engineers embraced, some openly weeping with relief. On screen, Adrian slumped in his chair as FBI agents secured his equipment. "You did it," Richard said to Emma, who sat exhausted in her oversized chair. She shook her head. "We did it, all of us together." Margaret enveloped her daughter in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "My brilliant, amazing girl." Howard Phillips approached, the other board members following behind him. The room quieted as he stood before Richard. "In 30 years on corporate boards," Phillips said solemnly, "I have never witnessed anything like what I've seen today." He extended his hand to Richard. "The vote is unnecessary. The board unanimously supports your continued leadership of Titan Technologies." Richard accepted the handshake, relief washing over him. But as he looked at Emma and Margaret, the janitor and her extraordinary daughter who had saved his empire, he realized his priorities had fundamentally shifted. "Thank you, Howard," he said, "but I have some significant changes to propose for Titan's future." 2 weeks later, Richard stood before a packed auditorium in Titan's headquarters. Employees filled every seat, media representatives lined the back wall, and financial analysts clustered near the exits, ready to race off with breaking news. "Titan has survived the most significant cyber attack in corporate history," Richard began, his voice carrying through the hushed space. "Our recovery stands at 97% completion, with remaining data expected to be restored by month's end." Applause erupted. Employees who had feared unemployment now celebrating their company's miraculous resurrection. This recovery would have been impossible without extraordinary effort from our security team, led by Dr. Harrison, Richard continued, nodding toward the cybersecurity chief. "But the true architect of our salvation was someone none of us expected." He gestured to the front row, where Emma sat between Margaret and Jennifer. The little girl wore a new dress for the occasion, her hair pulled back with a sparkly headband. Emma Mitchell, just 7 years old, demonstrated problem-solving abilities that humbled our most brilliant engineers. She didn't just save Titan, she revealed the truth behind the attack. On a large screen behind Richard, corporate photographs of Victor Zhang appeared. "We've provided federal authorities with conclusive evidence that our competitor, Quantum Dynamics, orchestrated industrial espionage against both Titan and Adrian Wells, deliberately turning us against each other." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The scandal had already dominated business news for days, with Quantum's stock plummeting amid multiple federal investigations. "Adrian Wells has withdrawn his guilty plea in exchange for cooperation with authorities," Richard continued. "The algorithms he developed, which I wrongly believed were stolen from Titan, will be properly credited to him with appropriate compensation." In the second row, Adrian sat with his attorney, his expression a complex mixture of vindication and lingering resentment. Their relationship would never be friendly, but the toxic hatred had been replaced by grudging mutual respect. "But today isn't about our past mistakes," Richard said. "It's about Titan's future, a future that will be built on fundamentally different values." He outlined the changes already approved by the board: significant raises for all employees below executive level, comprehensive healthcare coverage without exclusions for pre-existing conditions, educational scholarships for employees' children, and a new division focused on developing accessible technology for disadvantaged communities. Finally, Richard concluded, I'm announcing the establishment of the Catherine Coleman Foundation for Technological Innovation, with initial funding of $500 million. The foundation's first initiative will be the Emma Mitchell Scholarship Program, identifying extraordinary young minds from underprivileged backgrounds. Emma's eyes widened in surprise. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand, tears threatening to spill over. As the announcements concluded and the auditorium emptied, Richard joined Emma and Margaret in a private conference room. "How are you feeling?" he asked Margaret, noting her improved color. "The treatment is working," she confirmed. "Doctor Whitman says the tumors have already reduced by 30%. Richard nodded, genuine relief washing over him. "I've had Jennifer prepare some documents for you both to review." He slid folders across the table, one thin, one considerably thicker. "What's this?" Margaret asked, opening the thinner folder. "A formal job offer," Richard explained. "Titan needs a director of community engagement, someone who understands the needs of working families and can help shape our new initiatives." Margaret stared at the employment contract, focusing on the salary figure, more than 10 times what she'd earned as a janitor. "Mr. Coleman, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't have qualifications for this position." "You raised Emma," Richard countered. "That suggests extraordinary judgment and insight to me." Emma had opened the thicker folder, her expression puzzled as she examined complex legal documents. "What are these?" "Patents," Richard explained. "For the containment system you developed during the crisis, our legal team has registered 17 distinct innovations in your name." "My name?" Emma repeated. Richard nodded. "They're yours, Emma. The projected licensing value exceeds $30 million over the next decade." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "That's impossible." "It's already done," Richard said simply. "Additionally, I've established a trust fund for Emma's education, any school, anywhere in the world, whenever she's ready." Emma studied Richard thoughtfully. "You're different now." Richard smiled faintly. "Am I?" She nodded. "Before, you were like a locked computer, all passwords and firewalls. Now you're open source." Richard laughed, a genuine laugh that erased years from his face. "My wife would have liked that description." Margaret shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing all this?" Richard considered the question carefully. "For most of my life, I measured success by numbers in bank accounts and stock valuations. I convinced myself that was what mattered." He looked at Emma. "Your daughter showed me what true value looks like." "By fixing your computers?" Margaret asked. "By demonstrating courage, brilliance, and compassion simultaneously," Richard corrected. "By reminding me that people matter more than profits." Emma, who had been examining her patent documents, looked up. "What happens to Adrian now?" "He's agreed to lead a new cybersecurity initiative for the government, identifying vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. His legal troubles are mostly behind him." "Good," Emma said decisively. "He's really smart, just angry." "Like I was," Richard acknowledged. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what truly matters." As they prepared to leave, Richard handed Margaret one final envelope. "Your new office is on the 22nd floor. Jennifer will help you get settled next week." Margaret accepted the envelope, still dazed by the transformation of her circumstances. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Richard replied. "Just promise me one thing. When Emma revolutionizes the tech industry, remember who spotted her talent first." Emma grinned, suddenly looking like the 7-year-old child she was, rather than the prodigy who had saved a billion-dollar company. I'm going to build computers that think like people instead of just doing math. I believe you will, Richard said, entirely serious, and I can't wait to see it. 1 year later, Richard sat in the front row of an elementary school auditorium, watching as Emma Mitchell accepted the Presidential Medal of Innovation, the youngest recipient in history. Beside him, Margaret, elegant in a designer suit that matched her new executive position, wiped away tears of pride. Emma had spent the past year dividing her time between advanced studies with private tutors and developing what she called empathetic algorithms, coding that could recognize and respond to human emotional states. Major technology companies had already entered bidding wars for licensing rights, with Emma insisting that healthcare applications receive priority. "She's still the same Emma," Margaret had told Richard that morning. "She still sleeps with her stuffed rabbit and forgets to tie her shoes. But then she'll say something about neural networks that leaves her MIT mentors speechless." The White House ceremony concluded with Emma shaking the president's hand, her medal gleaming against her blue dress. As cameras flashed, Richard reflected on the extraordinary changes of the past year. Titan Technologies had not only recovered, but thrived, with stock values exceeding pre-attack levels. More significantly, their corporate culture had transformed. The Katherine Coleman Foundation had already awarded scholarships to 27 gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds, creating a pipeline of diverse talent for the technology sector. Margaret's cancer had responded remarkably well to treatment, with her oncologist using the term remission for the first time last month. Her leadership of Titan's community initiatives had earned national recognition, bringing technological education to underserved neighborhoods across Chicago. Even Adrian Wells had found redemption, his government cybersecurity work preventing 3 major attacks on infrastructure in recent months. While he and Richard maintained a professional distance, the toxic animosity had dissolved into something resembling mutual respect. After the ceremony, Emma bounded over to Richard, her medal swinging around her neck. "Did you see? The president asked me about quantum encryption." "I saw," Richard confirmed, smiling. "What did you tell him?" "That he should hire more 8-year-olds as advisors," Emma replied with a grin. Richard laughed, marveling at her combination of genius and childlike directness. As photographers approached for more pictures, he stepped back, watching Margaret embrace her daughter. His phone vibrated with a message from Jennifer. "Board meeting in 30 minutes. New acquisition proposal, ready for presentation." Richard sent a quick reply, "Delay until tomorrow, at White House with Emma." A year ago, nothing would have superseded a board meeting in Richard's priorities. Now, watching Emma explain complex algorithms to fascinated government officials, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "Mr. Coleman." A White House aide approached. "The president would like a word, if you have a moment." Richard nodded, following the aide to a small reception room where the president waited. "Extraordinary child," the president said, gesturing toward the main hall where Emma continued to charm everyone she met. Her algorithms could revolutionize everything from healthcare to defense. "She'll change the world," Richard agreed. "I'm just grateful to have a front-row seat." "I understand you've become something of a guardian to her," the president observed. Richard considered this. "I prefer mentor, or perhaps student. I've learned more from Emma than she has from me." As they discussed the Katherine Coleman Foundation's initiatives, Richard caught sight of Emma and Margaret through the doorway. They stood together near a window, sunlight illuminating them, as Emma excitedly explained something, her hands gesturing animatedly while Margaret listened with pride and love. The scene transported Richard back to that pivotal moment in his office a year ago, a desperate billionaire facing ruin, confronted by a determined child offering salvation in exchange for her mother's life. "Everything all right, Richard?" the president asked, noting his distraction. Yes, Richard replied, returning his attention to the conversation, just reflecting on how quickly life can change. Later, as they left the White House, Emma skipped ahead while Richard walked alongside Margaret. She insisted on donating half her patent licensing fees to pediatric cancer research, Margaret said quietly. When I asked why, she said, because some kids don't have moms who work for people like Mr. Coleman. Richard felt an unexpected tightness in his throat, wise beyond her years. She also said something else, Margaret continued, that when she helped save your company, she actually saved 3 things: Titan, my life, and your heart. Richard stopped walking, struck by the profound truth in the child's assessment. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured. Ahead of them, Emma had discovered a squirrel on the White House lawn and was watching it with the same intense concentration she applied to complex code. In that moment, the dichotomy of her existence was perfectly captured. An extraordinary mind housed in a child who still found wonder in ordinary discoveries. What happens next? Margaret asked. With Emma's future, I mean. The opportunities coming her way are overwhelming. Richard watched as Emma abandoned the squirrel to examine the presidential medal more closely, turning it over in her small hands with evident delight. We protect her childhood, he said firmly. Her gifts will change the world, but not at the expense of who she is. Margaret nodded, relief evident in her expression. That's exactly what I needed to hear. As they approached the waiting car, Emma ran back to them, eyes bright with excitement. I just had the best idea for a new algorithm. It would help doctors predict cancer recurrence years before symptoms appear. Richard exchanged glances with Margaret, both recognizing the pattern. Emma's greatest inspirations often arrived seemingly from nowhere, quantum leaps of insight that experts would later struggle to reverse engineer. Tell me about it on the way to dinner, Richard suggested, opening the car door. As they drove away from the White House, Emma enthusiastically outlined her newest breakthrough, using napkins from the car's refreshment compartment to sketch complex formulas. Richard listened intently, occasionally asking questions that helped refine her thinking. The future stretched before them, brilliant with possibilities, rich with purpose, and fundamentally transformed by the unlikely collision of their lives. In the rearview mirror, the White House receded from view, a fitting metaphor for the journey they had taken. From the brink of disaster to the pinnacle of recognition, their path had been neither straight nor predictable. But as Richard watched Emma sketch another formula, her face alight with the pure joy of discovery, he knew with absolute certainty that true fortune had nothing to do with billions.